Egypt had monuments, the Hittites had power. Their empire rose in central Anatolia, in what is now Turkey, and grew into one of the great powers of the Bronze Age. At the center of that power stood Hattusa, a heavily fortified capital surrounded by rough highland country. The Hittites were not a marginal kingdom. They controlled trade routes, vassal cities, and the approaches between Anatolia and Syria. Their geography mattered. Anatolia offered defensible terrain, access to metals, and room to build a durable state. The gates of Hattusa still suggest the kind of authority the empire projected. This was a state that knew how to build, defend, and intimidate. Its fortifications, temples, and processional spaces were designed for a royal capital, not a frontier town. Religion and kingship were tightly linked in Hittite rule. The empire was held together not only by force, but by ritual, administration, and sacred legitimacy. At sanctuaries like Yazilikaya, power was carved into stone. The gods marched beside the kingdom in monumental reliefs. The Hittites also left behind a state archive that reveals how organized they really were. Their laws, treaties, and court texts show a bureaucracy capable of governing a large and diverse realm. Their soldiers swore formal loyalty to the throne, which tells us discipline was part of the system. Horse training was specialized enough to become a written science. That mattered because the Hittites were famous for the military machine that made them feared across the Near East. Chariots, elite warriors, and flexible command helped turn the kingdom into an imperial power. Hittite chariots became symbols of prestige and battlefield shock. Their military culture was part of a wider strategy of conquest and control. Royal imagery from Hittite and Neo-Hittite tradition still carries that martial confidence. Kings ruled through both authority and spectacle. Court officials, vassals, and scribes turned conquest into administration. That system brought the Hittites south into the political world of Syria and the Levant. There they collided with the only other superpower in the region, New Kingdom Egypt. The struggle was not just about pride. It was about trade, territory, and influence over crucial cities. One of those cities was Kadesh, a strategic prize on the Orontes River. In 1274 BCE, Ramesses II marched north to face the Hittite king Muwatalli II. The Egyptians later depicted the battle as a personal triumph of Ramesses under impossible odds. But the battle was far more complicated than royal propaganda suggested. The Hittites used mobility, surprise, and concentrated chariot power to slam into the Egyptian position. For a moment, one of the greatest kings of Egypt looked dangerously exposed. Ramesses recovered and fought back, but he did not crush the Hittite army. The Hittites held their ground as a power equal to Egypt, and that is what makes Kadesh so important. It was not a clean Egyptian victory, and it was certainly not a Hittite disappearance. In the years that followed, neither side could impose total dominance. Eventually, war gave way to diplomacy. The result was the Treaty of Kadesh, the first known great international peace treaty in history. It formalized peace, mutual recognition, and even cooperation between the two great courts. Later, royal marriage diplomacy reinforced that settlement and turned rivalry into a working relationship. This is one reason the Hittites matter so much. They were not only warriors, but master negotiators of empire. Their world combined kings, gods, scribes, vassals, and strategic roads into a real imperial system. Yet even strong systems can break when the wider world begins to fail. By the late Bronze Age, the Eastern Mediterranean was under growing pressure from disruption, war, and instability. Trade routes weakened, shipments faltered, and interdependent states became vulnerable. The whole bronze economy depended on materials and movement that could no longer be taken for granted. Once the network cracked, even great powers struggled to recover. The Hittite Empire collapsed in that wider Bronze Age crisis, and Hattusa was eventually abandoned. After the fall, only smaller Neo-Hittite kingdoms carried fragments of the old tradition forward. Figures, stelae, and inscriptions from those later states preserved echoes of imperial memory. But the great empire itself faded so completely that for centuries the Hittites were almost forgotten. They survived more as scattered biblical references and broken stones than as a clearly remembered civilization. Only archaeology and deciphered tablets restored them to history. Sites such as Alakahoyuk and Bogaskoy helped reveal how deep that lost world really was. The Hittites were powerful enough to fight Egypt as equals, wise enough to make peace as diplomats, and tragic enough to vanish into silence for millennia. Their rediscovery reminds us that history does not only forget weak states, sometimes it forgets empires.